A very good evening and welcome to the India Development Debate. I'm Tamanna Inamdar, and today the lead story on the show is all about the economy. We are looking at a possibility of a fresh set of reforms to be unveiled, at least that's the buzz. But before we know what those reforms are, I think it's an important time to step back, press the pause button, and also review where we are at. There are a whole load of announcements that the government has been making in recent times. Are they really helping? That's the big story that we're tracking on the show today. But we're also talking about Miss Kamala Harris. The vice presidential nominee for the Democrats has fired up the Indian imagination. Everyone is cheering, everyone's excited and wanting to have a part of that pie. But what are Ms. Harris's policy and what does a Biden-Harris ticket mean for India? We're going to get into that story in a bit of detail up ahead. We are also going to hear from Amit Kalyani in our special segment on the India Revival Mission. So a lot lined up for you this evening, but let me get to it on the economy. July was supposed to be the month that things improved right after June, but a spate of localized and random lockdowns may have skewed the picture. At least that's where the data is pointing. It's a bit unclear because you have high frequency numbers which show that there may be some improvement in unemployment, in e-way bills, etc. But then you have manufacturing data which shows that we're still in a world of pain. Now in the middle of this, there is news that there will be a fresh set of economic boosters that will be unveiled perhaps as early as 15th August. And at the end of this week, we need to now ask, what is it that India really needs at this point? And to join me in that discussion today is Sachchidanand Shukla, the Chief Economist at M&M. Yamini Aiyar, President for the Center for Policy Research, joins us on the show this evening, as does N.R. Bhanumurthy, VC of Base University. Welcome to all of you and thank you so much for joining us today. Ms. Aiyar, let me begin with your take. And in the middle of all of this buzz of a fresh set of economic boosters, let's take a look at what the government has been doing over the last few days. And I want to focus specifically on the PLIs, the production-linked incentives which have been unveiled in various sectors. Do you think that that's the right direction to move in?
So I think we need to answer that question, it's important for us to take better stock of where we are right now. I think broadly speaking, over the last 2-3 months since the middle of May, when the first, when the sort of Atmanirbhar package was announced, we know two very important things. We know that some effort was made to strengthen social protection schemes, so food and Narega were the two important pillars, which were the sort of bare minimal things that were needed to be done to boost demand, particularly in rural areas, given the reverse migration. The extension of the food, the public distribution system, free grain from the center all the way to November is also an extremely important right step in the right direction. If we don't boost demand, everything else is going to collapse. The question to be asked on the demand front is this enough? We already know that for the National Rural Employment Guarantee Program, we have had far more beneficiaries, uptake of the program, so to speak, than in comparative terms from previous years. So clearly there's huge demand for work. That means that there are elements of the formal and informal economy, both in rural areas as well as in small towns that service the rural economy, that are still not as robust. Although agriculture has done relatively well. And essentially one of the big challenges that we are confronting is that most state governments are reaching the saturation point of their Narega budgets. So I think the first thing that we need to ask is whether or not we have the right resources to boost demand, and do so with a little more gusto than we have done so far, because absent that, everything else that we do is not necessarily going to address the key challenge that we are facing. The second challenge I think that we are confronting is that, as you rightly said in your opening remarks as well, we are seeing these localized lockdowns emerging consistently through the country. And I suspect we are going to see more of those localized lockdowns, which are going to have multiple ripple effects on other aspects of the economy. So all the incentives we are giving are fine on paper. The challenge is in the transmission, and that transmission is very much about the complexity of the local scenario. And for us to be able to resolve this, I honestly believe that it is not for the center to be doing as much as it is for the states, because only they are in the best position to determine. And frankly, right now, they are the ones that are making those decisions anyway. And so the real incentive that the government of India needs to give is to be able to strengthen state budgets. They have neither the fiscal nor the monetary powers to do so, to be able to boost and give the right incentives to local industry to boost the economy.
You know, I think the point about local industry is very key. And Mr. Shukla, I want to get your view on this. There are a lot of different narratives that we've been hearing over the last few weeks. One is that recovery in rural India has been more robust. The other is that the misery and suffering in rural India has also been greater. We also have this concern that COVID-19 and the infection could be spreading now in rural areas after reverse migration, etc. Do you think that this is the key focus, to get the MSMEs up and running, to make sure that there is enough cash flow out there? Or do we need to go down the path of boosting personal incomes and direct incomes?
So, Tamanna, I think the way to look at it is this, and Yamini, I think, touched upon that point. Right now, what you have is a lot of uncertainty over the COVID spread, infection rates, and stuff like that. It is spreading to the hinterland. And what it is doing in the process is it is inducing a lot of uncertainties on the supply side response. While we have seen a lot of these indicators, the high frequency ones that you spoke about, we are seeing some sort of uptick in activity across the board. But what it does is that because you're doing localized lockdowns, it is inducing a lot of uncertainties, which is very randomized. Now, there is one thing that the government can do, and it doesn't cost any money, is can the government of India really enunciate or clearly tell us that this is the principle based on which we will unlock, right? The moment you do that, everybody can then streamline their supply side responses. They know in terms of planning and production what is to be done. So yes, we don't really know how and where it is going to spread or when it is going to get under control. But I think this is something that doesn't really cost money but removes a lot of uncertainty on the supply side.
There have been a lot of proponents for direct cash transfers at this point. Among them, former Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh. Do you think that that is something which cannot be let off anymore? Or was it now in hindsight a wise decision to stay away from it? The government's position has been fairly clear that direct cash transfers will be limited to the schemes that already exist. They sort of compounded those that needed meals with free grains, etc. But large scale direct cash transfers is something that the government hasn't gone in for. Do you think it can put that away any longer?
Well, I think in principle, the direct cash transfer is a very important policy intervention a country can look at. But I think our problem is in terms of implementation, as Yamini as well as Mr. Shukla pointed out. In fact, we have many measures that have been already on table where we are not able to really implement as the way it has to be. So I think in terms of direct cash transfer, what is happening to the rural areas, as both of them already spoken about it, the direct cash transfer is the one which has been used in a partial way. I think the demand is the same kind of policy need to be implemented at the urban areas. I think the whole problem right now at the urban areas is that we are not really clear who are the potential beneficiaries. At least in the rural areas, we certainly have some databases to say that who are the beneficiaries. And I think this is exactly what the government have done, and even yesterday or day before yesterday, the way Prime Minister has transferred almost 17,000 crore with the press of a button. So in that kind of a situation, what is important right now is, before we talk about a universal basic income or the direct cash transfer that we are talking about, in the urban areas, we have to identify those beneficiaries. Without doing that, I don't think this measure will be able to be implemented. And we have also seen how the whole country messed up the whole, the migrant issue. Again, we never had any information about the migrant population,
Yes.
I completely agree with Yamini. I think the state governments need to chip in. You cannot really look at the central government all the time for all the issues. And I'm sure there are some states already started doing that. I know Uttar Pradesh already started, Madhya Pradesh already started, generating a database of the migrant population, so that the public policy intervention can be made effectively. In the absence of that, I think theoretically it is a very, very nice concept, but in terms of practicality, I don't think so at the moment.
Fair enough. I want to circle back to industry and sort of boosting industry to some extent. Yamini, here let me talk about higher import tariffs, some amount of import licensing that has been implemented over the last few days, and all the conversation around it seems to be focusing on China, as if it's all just aimed at penalizing China in some form or fashion. But I think what we sometimes skip is that this is also to promote and allow local industry to survive. Do you think that that's sort of the right approach we should be looking at this point?
So, Tamanna, just bear with me for 1 second, because before I answer this question, I did want to just quickly come in on one point that Professor Bhanumurthy made about the urban issue. I think it's very important for us to remember that while we have seen some uptake of the economy in rural areas because of the agriculture, because of a good sowing season combined with NREGA and others, actually urban employment is not looking so good, and even more worrying, urban wages have dropped quite a lot. And CMI's latest data is also telling us that salaried employees are also now really suffering. And these are the very, very thin sliver of the Indian economy that actually has a degree of surplus and some amount of saving. So that saving may have taken them through for the last 3 months, 4 months. But now, as job losses are beginning to kick in the formal sector, even the salaried employee is facing a crisis. So in that context, I think we do have to be a lot more innovative about what policy instruments we want to use for some kind of social protection, cash transfer for urban India. And there are some levers. So the building and other workers, construction worker board exists. It was reactivated in the early part of the lockdown. There are other social worker, social insurance programs and boards. So, if we work hard, we can find the databases to just get this system moving. And I think we will have to extend the PDS much beyond November, and we should prepare for that. To your question about import substitution, I think to my mind, there's enough data on the table that tells us that import substitution and raising of import tariffs is going to fundamentally impact our ability to be attractive for FDI. And India right now, our private sector does not have, at least at this point in time, the appetite for private investment. Even before the pandemic, we were seeing private investment was dropping quite significantly in India. And we've been moving along expecting that we will see more FDI. We are sending all the wrong signals for that. And I think this tension between raising import tariffs and expecting that foreign and private investment is going to help recover our economy, there's such a clear contradiction here that I think we are making, at a policy level, quite a big mistake. This is not the time. This is the time for us to do whatever it takes to be able to bring the economy back on track. Everything else later. And I think we are doing everything else first rather than bringing the economy back on track. And there's enough evidence to tell you that import substitution is going to hurt you in the short term and, frankly, the long term.
Right. I want to quickly come to what we should do. We've talked about what the problem is so far, but in the context of why we're having this discussion, which is a buzz that a new set of reforms or measures will be announced. Oddly enough, one of the measures that is being talked about is the formalizing of a tax charter, which was proclaimed in the last budget. Perhaps that won't move the needle here or there. So, Mr. Shukla, let me come to you with a very straight question. What do we actually need to do? What is the kind of announcement / reform that you think will move the needle?
So you're right, Tamanna. I think the tax charter is a great medium-term step. But I think we need to be very cognizant right now. We need to clarify or clearly distinguish between the current issues and the aspirational issues. This is something that is going to serve us well over the medium term. We need a charter. We need something for the income taxpayers. But I think what we will need to do is clearly enunciate, identify 3-4 big sectors which can absorb a lot of money or big money, big dollops of money, and which can be multi-year or multi-decade drivers of growth. Now, there are sectors that we can really work with or work on. One of them happens to be agriculture. I mean, we know the agro-processing and the supply chain bit. We know about the healthcare. I mean, just trying to enhance the scheme, the healthcare scheme that we have, which is already the largest in the world, from 50 crore to say 80 or 90 crore, just enhancing the coverage, plus investing in hard infrastructure as well as soft infrastructure within healthcare. Education happens to be the other one. And similarly, we can think of getting some of these projects. I mean, we have that 1,11,000 crore infra pipeline. And if the government can really expedite some of that by some innovative use of financing,
right.
I think that will really help. And the other bit, I think, is which is very important, is try to get consumption moving. Now, this could be in the form of some vouchers, time-bound consumption vouchers, right? I mean, you give every household, 1,000 or 2,000 rupee worth of vouchers. And what this does is, this obviates the need for people to really talk about the marginal propensity to consume versus save. And this is a clear-cut boost to consumption. This will be used only for consumption. But I think this will probably have to be timed with some sort of normalcy or some fair degree of unlock. Because otherwise, I mean, it doesn't really serve the purpose.
Right. It's down the drain, right. Professor Bhanumurthy, let me get your, a quick take on what you expect to see. And I think this voucher idea is quite an innovative one.
Yeah, I think that's certainly a very innovative idea. I think that should help, boost some kind of demand. Certainly, I think that's a good one. But I think, once we, maybe 1 or 2 months down the line, if these local lockdowns are removed, I think what is important for us is to provide some kind of incentives for the economy to activate itself. In my view, one of the sectors I think largely neglected for quite some time is the banking sector. I think, Tamanna, you know that I've been arguing for some time. I think it's very important for us to improve the financial intermediation in this country, which has been stuck for some time. It's almost 10 years that banking industry is in doldrums. And what we are doing is basically a piecemeal kind of a strategy in this whole sector.
Yeah.
I think what is right now is we need to really strengthen the banking industry. And otherwise, what are the policy measures that you make and what are the policy measures that RBI is making, it will not really help transmission. I think that's what Yamini also talking about in the beginning, that we need to improve the transmission of the policies. I think there are many good policies, but if you don't really implement it, you don't have the system to implement, I don't think we are going to see any impact of those policy measures. But there's another important sector which I think the government already started talking about is the construction sector. Okay, the biggest success of this government, in my view, is the rural housing program.
Yes.
the way it is being implemented in the rural areas, I think that needs to be replicated in the urban areas, which will have a large multiplier effect, not only on the urban, areas and urban employment, but also for the people who are coming for working. So the construction sector will have a very large forward linkage with all the economic activities. So I think one needs to really front load the kind of ambition that housing for all that we had for 2022. We need to really start right now. I saw some proposals on increasing this allocation for the urban housing. I hope that will be speeded up, and that will have a very, very large multiplier impact on output as well as the employment opportunities.
All right. I must close with Yamini's take as well on the solution side of it. We've spent some time identifying the policies that have worked, the ones that haven't. But Yamini, if there is indeed going to be a fresh set of announcements, and some reports say that these announcements have been crafted after inputs from various expert sectors, including global manufacturing companies, on what they would like to see. What would you like to see on that list?
So I think first and foremost, what I'd like to see on that list is resolving the problem of state finances. None of our expectations will be fulfilled if we don't resolve the actually very serious deep debt that state finances are confronting, and all the big heavy lifting of COVID-related expenditure is all taking place at the state level. So we saw in the Atmanirbhar package some effort at increasing the borrowing limit for states. I think that needs to be complemented with a much more a larger grant from the center to states to be able to tide over. And this could mean the government of India borrowing from the RBI and then giving grants to states. Various people have also suggested things like COVID bonds and so on. There are many options on the table, but the fundamental thing is, if money has to be unlocked, that money needs to be devolved to states so that they can get on with what they need to do. I do agree that the public infrastructure story is important, and housing for the poor could be a very good way of moving ahead. We have seen quite a lot of success in rural India. This will have a multiplier effect both on wages as well as on the construction industry more broadly. I also think that there is no getting away from more money into Narega and building out some kind of cash transfer system for urban India, which is going to see a very serious crisis. It's been depressed for the moment, but it's going to come up, I think, in the next 2 to 3 months.
I want to thank all of you for joining us on the first big discussion this evening on the India Development Debate. Remember, we will be keeping a very close watch on all of these measures which are expected to be announced in the next few days.